Have you ever heard the term stagflation? It's an economics portmanteau for a circumstance that, while rare, is widely viewed as an emotional nightmare. The word is a mashup of stagnation and inflation. When the economy is stagnant, it means that the gross domestic product is either not growing or, at best, growing at a very slow rate. Often, a stagflation economy is one in recession. To compound matters, persistent inflation usually accompanies the recessionary environment. Not only is the economy not growing, but goods and services are becoming more expensive, reducing purchasing power. Even if this happens slowly, it can have a devastating effect on investor and consumer psychology. To make matters worse, a natural offshoot of stagflation is increased unemployment. Businesses lay off employees to save money, which in turn decreases the purchasing power of consumers, which means less consumer spending and even slower economic growth. It's a vicious cycle that can be difficult to get away from. It's called the wage price spiral. Economic slowdowns are a normal part of the business cycle, but when financial speculation gets out of hand, which seems to be the case now, the market needs to stabilize itself. This usually happens through a painful recession. But here's the difference between recession and stagflation. Recessions are fairly routine parts of a normal business cycle. They're relatively pedestrian and relatively tolerable. In contrast, stagflation is a prolonged period of slow or no economic growth, coupled with high rates of inflation. Recessions are bad, but stagflation is certainly worse. First named in the 1970s, stagflation shattered long-term held economic theories when it emerged. It manifested most dramatically during and immediately after the 1973-74 OPEC oil crisis. Until then, stagflation was thought to be impossible. It's vexing for policymakers because the solution, such as it is, involves picking between the lesser of two evils: fight inflation to make the recession deeper and longer lasting than it would have been on one hand, or lower rates to protect the economy and run the risk of having inflation run even higher, and for longer. Stated differently, policy fixes for slow growth tend to worsen inflation and vice versa. It makes stagflation hard to fight. Solving one challenge merely exacerbates the other. It turns out that the easy monetary policy pursued by central banks during the boom years of the 1950s and 60s was unsustainable. Until then, most economists believed in something called the Phillips curve. The Phillips curve charts the relationship between unemployment and inflation. And historically, when unemployment was low, inflation would increase, and when unemployment was high, inflation would decrease. The two were thought of as being mutually exclusive challenges that would never present themselves simultaneously, until they did. So why did things go sour in the 1970s? It should be noted that there's a divergence in monetary policy mandates on different sides of the border. The dual mission of the American Federal Reserve is to keep prices stable and maximize employment. In Canada, the task is singular: maintain price stability. Stagflation's appearance in the 1970s has had monetary officials and national governments on guard ever since. Paul Volcker was an American economist who served as the chairman of the Federal Reserve from 1979 to 1987. During his tenure as chairman, he was widely credited with having ended high levels of inflation with measures known as the Volcker shock. He raised interest rates to previously unheard of levels in order to stave off inflation once and for all. There can be little doubt that those who live through multi-year brushes with stagflation can find life miserable. The economy is uncertain, but everything costs more, and there's often no end in sight. More recently, in April of this year, current Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell warned that the Trump administration's new tariffs were significantly larger than expected, with likely effects that included higher inflation and slower growth, which are the classic precursors to stagflation. With companies already planning layoffs, Americans face the prospect of an economic challenge that generations of policymakers had largely avoided. Because tariffs are applied to virtually all countries, and because many may choose to retaliate in kind, the situation is likely to worsen as the year goes on. We now face the first long-term threat of stagflation in 2 generations after the Trump administration has imposed its tariffs. This time, the overall economic backdrop is far more frightening. Valuations for stocks in most of the world, but especially in the United States, are near generational high. They're risky. On top of that, the American accumulated debt is now around $37 trillion. And as a share of GDP, that's a debt level that is much, much higher than it was a half century ago. You put it all together, And we not only have a situation where painful and prolonged stagflation may rear its ugly head, but where policymakers will have fewer levers to bring the problem to heel than they did previously. The next few years could be extremely painful in general, and they might be particularly painful for investors, especially those who are mostly invested in conventional stocks and bonds. If the past is any guide, people would do well to invest in hard assets like commodities, real estate, gold, and the like. And I'm worried that the past may repeat itself. But I'm also worried that so few of my fellow advisors are worried.